Karen's voice sliced through the humid evening air like a dull knife, shrill and unrelenting. "You're not fooling anyone, you deadbeat," she bellowed, her chins wobbling as she leaned over her porch railing, pointing a manicured finger at me. I was hauling the last of my boxes to the moving truck, sweat dripping down my back, when her tirade began again. For 3 years, HOA Karen, as the neighborhood called her, had been the self-appointed dictator of our cul-de-sac, her reign of terror fueled by petty complaints and an ego the size of her oversized SUV. Today, as I packed up to leave this suffocating suburb, she'd found her final excuse to make my life hell. The trouble started months ago, when I missed a single HOA meeting due to my wife's funeral. Karen, the HOA president, took it personally. She'd been hounding me ever since fines for my lawn being half an inch too long, complaints about my son's motorcycle parked in the driveway, even a letter claiming my mailbox was non-compliant. I'd ignored her mostly. Grief does that to you. It shrinks the world to what matters. But Karen? She thrived on control, her beady eyes scanning the street for any infraction she could weaponize. Now, as I moved out to start fresh with my son, Daniel, she stood on her porch, accusing me of disturbing the peace with my moving truck. "You think you can just leave without paying your fines?" she spat, her voice carrying to the neighbors peeking through their blinds. "I've called the cops, Mark. They're on their way." I set down a box of my late wife's books, the weight of her loss heavier than the cardboard. "Karen," I said, voice steady despite the heat rising in my chest, "I'm leaving. What's your problem now?" Her lips curled into a smirk. "You'll see. You can't run from consequences." The irony was, Karen didn't know consequences were coming for her. She didn't know my son, Daniel, was one of the officers she'd summoned. And she definitely didn't know about the paper trail she'd left, complaints, forged signatures, and a little scheme she'd been running with the HOA funds. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The neighborhood had been Karen's kingdom for years. She'd waddled down the street in her garish floral dresses, clipboard in hand, noting every cracked driveway or untrimmed hedge. She'd find single mothers for their kids' bikes on the lawn, lecture retirees about their faded flags, and once tried to ban Mrs. Alvarez's food truck because it lowered property values. Everyone hated her, but no one dared cross her. She had a knack for twisting words, making you feel small, like you were the one breaking some sacred code. I'd seen her reduce grown men to apologies over misplaced recycling bins. But I was done playing her game. As I loaded another box, Karen's phone was glued to her ear, her voice dripping with smug satisfaction. "Yes, officer, it's an urgent matter. This man is causing a disturbance, and I suspect illegal activity. Please hurry." Illegal activity? I almost laughed. The only crime here was her audacity. I kept packing, ignoring her, but the neighbors started to gather Mrs. Alvarez on her stoop, old Mr. Jenkins leaning on his cane, both watching the spectacle unfold. Karen thrived on an audience, her voice growing louder, more theatrical. "This neighborhood deserves better than people like you, Mark. You and your delinquent son." That's when I snapped. Not loudly, not with a shout, but with a quiet fury that had been simmering since my wife's death. "Karen," I said, turning to face her, "you don't know a damn thing about my son." Her eyes narrowed, but before she could retort, the flash of red and blue lights cut through the dusk. A police cruiser pulled up, and Karen's smirk widened. She thought she'd won. Out stepped Daniel, my son, in his crisp uniform, badge glinting under the streetlights. At 26, he was everything I wasn't: calm, composed, with his mother's sharp eyes and a heart too big for this world. Karen didn't recognize him at first. She hadn't seen him since he was a lanky teen riding that offensive motorcycle. "Officer," she called, waddling toward him, her voice syrupy sweet. "Thank God you're here. This man is causing chaos, and I demand you arrest him." Daniel glanced at me, his lips twitching with the faintest smile. "Evening, Dad," he said, loud enough for Karen to hear. Her face froze, the color draining from her cheeks. "Dad?" she stammered, her confidence cracking like cheap glass. Daniel ignored her, pulling out his notepad. "Ma'am, I got a call about a disturbance. Care to explain? Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. She pointed at me, then at the truck, then back at me. He's breaking HOA rules. He's moving out without settling his fines. And then his truck is blocking the street. Daniel raised an eyebrow, looking at the truck parked neatly in my driveway. Blocking the street, ma'am? Looks fine to me. He turned to me. Dad, you good? I nodded, leaning against the truck, arms crossed. Just trying to move on, son. Karen's eyes darted between us, realization dawning. This is outrageous, she shrieked. You can't just ignore this. I'm the HOA president. I have rights. Daniel's expression hardened. Actually, ma'am, I need to talk to you about something else. We've had reports of financial discrepancies in the HOA records. Missing funds, forged signatures. Your name keeps coming up. The air went still. Mrs. Alvarez gasped, and Mr. Jenkins let out a low whistle. Karen's face turned a sickly shade of gray. That's absurd, she sputtered. I've done nothing wrong. You can't accuse me without proof. Daniel pulled a folded document from his pocket. We've got proof, ma'am. Bank statements, emails, even a few neighbors who've come forward. You've been skimming dues for years, haven't you? I watched, almost pitying her as she stumbled over her words. Almost. Karen had made life miserable for too many people, for too long. She'd bullied, manipulated, and stolen, all while hiding behind her title and her smug superiority. Now, her kingdom was crumbling, and she had no one to blame but herself. Skimming, she squeaked, clutching her phone like a lifeline. This is a setup. I'll sue you all. Daniel didn't flinch. You can try, ma'am, but you'll need to come with me to answer some questions. He gestured to the cruiser, his voice calm but firm. Now, please. Karen's eyes widened, her hands shaking as she realized she wasn't talking her way out of this. The neighbors watched, silent, as Daniel guided her to the car, her protests growing weaker with every step. As the cruiser door closed, Mrs. Alvarez approached me, her eyes bright with something like relief. Mark, she whispered, is it true? She's been stealing. I nodded, watching the cruiser pull away. For years, apparently. Daniel's been looking into it since she tried to find me for my wife's memorial garden. Mrs. Alvarez shook her head, a smile breaking through. Karma's a hell of a thing. That night, as I finished loading the truck, the neighborhood felt lighter, like it could finally breathe. Karen's reign was over, her own arrogance her undoing. I thought of my wife, how she'd have laughed at the irony Karen, so obsessed with control, brought down by the son she'd dismissed as a delinquent. Daniel called me later, saying Karen was facing charges for embezzlement and fraud. She'd likely lose her house, her status, everything she'd built her identity around. I drove away from that cul-de-sac for the last time, the moving truck rattling with memories of loss and new beginnings. Karen's story wasn't mine to finish, but I knew one thing. She'd never terrorize anyone again. Sometimes, the universe has a way of settling scores, and tonight, it had settled hers. The end.